what wake do you expect from his
A tsunami.
presidency?
Yeah, no, I think the kinds of things. I mean, I was thinking that that instead of a sort of slow slide, it's a sort of precipitous plunge into everything that we've already been experiencing, being completely ramped up, completely ratcheted up. And so one of the other terms that I really think about in terms of the work and how I want, like, so I say that I hope I've attended to things with care, and that the things that I'm trying to think through are capacious enough for people to use in ways that I couldn't imagine. And so one of those things is the weather. And I guess what I've really been thinking about is that with the election of the new president, who shall not be named, that thinking about the wake and the weather as the totality of our environments, and that the weather is the total climate, and that climate is anti-black. And so the ways in which this really tells us, it makes quite clear what weather we're in and the kind of work that we need to do. That's already ongoing, and the work that we need to continue to do, and the new sort of fronts that we need to take up in order to refuse and insist on, in order to make the leap, to use the LEAP manifesto.
That's incredibly hopeful, is what I hear from that, as it's in kind of a demand of responsibility, I think, upon all of us to there's no place for complacency, is what I hear you talking about. The weather is a beautiful metaphor and a description.
Well, I mean, the weather is, when I was thinking about the wake, I mean, those ships, they were always paying attention to navigation. One of the main ships in the book is the Zong, in which, because of a mistake of navigation, they threw overboard 142 living Africans, right? So the weather had everything to do with that, and weather in terms of plantation management. So I think it's really a way to think about and you don't pay attention to the weather unless it's a really beautiful day or it's a really terrible day, but it is the state in which we live all the time, and we have to attend to that.
Could we be able to ask you to do read one more, please, if you would?
And this is from The Ship, which has to do with the Zong. So a ship moving through water generates a particular pattern of waves. The bow wave is in front of the ship, and that wave then spreads out in the recognizable V pattern on either side of and then behind the ship. The size of the bow wave dictates how far out the wake starts. Waves that occur in the wake of the ship move at the same speed of the ship. From at least the 16th century onward, a major part of the ocean engineering of ships has been to minimize the bow wave and therefore to minimize the wake. But the effect of trauma is the opposite. It is to make maximal the wake. So I mentioned the Zong. So it's likely that those thrown overboard of the Zong, because many of them were sick and likely emaciated or close to it, they would have had very little body fat. Their bodies would have been denser than seawater. It's likely then that those Africans thrown overboard would have floated just a short while, and only because of the shapes of their bodies. It's likely, too, that they would have sunk relatively quickly and drowned relatively quickly as well. And then there were the sharks that always traveled in the wake of slave ships. There have been studies done on whales that have died and sunk to the sea floor. These studies show that within a few days, the whales' bodies are picked almost clean by benthic organisms, those organisms that live on the sea floor. My colleague Anne Gardulski tells me that it's most likely that a human body would not make it to the sea floor intact. I ask her what happened to the bodies, by which I mean what happened to the components of their bodies in salt water. Anne Gardulski tells me that because nutrients cycle through the ocean, the process of organisms eating organisms is the cycling of nutrients through the ocean. The atoms of those people who were thrown overboard are out there in the ocean even today. They were eaten, organisms processed them, and those organisms were in turn eaten and processed, and the cycle continues. Around 90 to 95% of the tissues of things that are eaten in the water cycle, in the water column, get recycled. As Anne told me, nobody dies of old age in the ocean. The amount of time it takes for a substance to enter the ocean and then leave the ocean is called residence time. Human blood is salty, and sodium, Gardulski tells me, has a residence time of 260 million years. And what happens to the energy that's produced in the waters? It continues cycling like atoms in residence time. We, black people, exist in the residence time of the wake, a time in which, quote, everything is now. It is all now.